Good morning, everyone. In the last class, we are trying to discuss with dependency injection is how exactly the dependency injection is working in Spring. Because instead of tight coupling here, how we are going to work with the loose coupling, the concept we identified, and how we are achieving here. Using this particular interface way, we are trying to achieve the particular loose coupling here. Right now, so today we are going to check with the more important information regarding our container here. Because in the last class, what we are doing here, we are trying to create a container here. So here we are trying to create with the container object here. But now, so if you observe, we are having this particular bean factory is the interface here. So interface can contain more than one interface, more than one implementation class here. Getting the point. So now what you need to understand here, basically we don't have only one container here. We are having multiple containers here. So we need to understand so what is the purpose of each container here, how exactly so it's going to work internally. Getting the point. So the simple understanding here, in the last class we are trying to work with XML bean factory. So XML bean factory is an implementation of which interface here? Something called bean factory. Now you can observe here, so this particular bean factory is a interface or class. Bean factory is a interface here. Getting the point. Now you can observe, so this particular XML bean factory. So if you observe XML bean factory class here, so you can see the icon here, C. C is nothing but class, I is nothing but interface here. Now we will observe what exactly the XML bean factory which contains it. So now you can see XML bean factory which is extending from the default listable bean factory. If I'm going to click on F3 here, now you can observe bean definition. So finally abstract bean factory. So this particular abstract bean factory is extending from the configure bean factory. This particular configure bean factory is going to extend from the bean factory interface here. Basically, I'm trying to explain bean factory interface here, and okay, so we are not finding the bean factory interface here. Here, hierarchical bean factory. So now you can observe bean factory. So if you observe, basically bean factory is a one interface, and one more interface we are having something called hierarchical bean factory. So this particular hierarchical bean factory, so which is extending from the configure bean factory. Getting the point. So again, the configure bean factory is a one interface here. So now you can see XML bean factory, which is extending from the default listable bean factory. So if I'm going to expand this particular default, now you can observe the configurable list bean factory we are able to see here. So now, so this is the way finally we are able to identify the particular bean factory interface information here. Finally, we are able to understand here the XML bean factory which is implementing from the bean factory interface here. So now what you are understanding here? So whatever the bean factory we are having, so XML bean factory is the implementation class. So once we identify this particular XML bean factory is the implementation class. So we identified here, so this is the one constructor which is expecting the resource object here. So what are the resource objects we are having here? Getting the point. So what are the resource objects we are having? We need to understand here. We need to understand here. Basically, now you can see the resource is coming from the various org Spring Framework code.io.resource package. Getting the point. So this resource also coming inside this particular Spring here. Again, if you observe, resource is a interface here. Resource is a interface here. So what we need to do, we need to understand the implementation classes on this particular resource here. So we are having different kinds of resources here. So first one we identified the file system XML file system resource here. File system resource is one of the implementation of the resource interface here. We'll observe the file system resource. Now you can see one more abstract resource we are having. So now you can observe abstract resource which is extending from the which is implementing from the resource interface. So this is the way the final file system resource we are having here. We are trying to work with this particular file system resource here. Okay, now along with this particular file system resource, we are having another implementation of this particular resource interface here. Getting the point. So now we need to understand what exactly the other resource we are having here. The first two, another one we are having, so something called class path resource here. So what exactly the class path resource will contain here? Getting the point. So what exactly the class path resource will contain here? If you observe, let me open this particular class path resource. Now you can see, so this is another interface, this is another implementation class here. So if you observe, again, this class also extending from the same abstract resource. If I'm going to expand this particular abstract resource, you can see, so again, the resource interface we are able to see here. Getting the point. So this section is very important here. Now, we understand here, this is one more implementation of the particular resource interface here. So basically, the difference between file system resource and class path resource here, the file system resource which is going to load the configuration file based on the file with a fully qualified path here. Getting the point. So based on this particular qualified path here. Now you can see, so whenever we are trying to specify this particular path here, what happens internally? Based on this particular path location, the file is going to loaded by the file system resource here. Same way, whenever we are trying to work with the class path resource here, what it will do? It will try to check with the configuration file in the class path here. So class path is nothing but our source directory. So whenever we are trying to add the class path information into our source directory, whenever we are trying to add the particular configuration file into the source directory. So what exactly the source directory will contain here? And here, so we are able to see SRC. So this section we are going to call as a source directory. In this particular location, if I am trying to add, getting the point, if I am trying to add the configuration file here, what it will do? The class path resource is going to load it here. The class path resource is going to load it here. Now we'll understand here how exactly the class path resource will contain here. So let me copy this particular section here and here I want to work with class path resource. So which is taking some time here to import this particular class path resource here. Now you can see class path resource having three properties here. So which is taking the single path and another two, so which is taking the along with this particular path which are expecting the classes here. Right. Now we'll understand this particular path only. So now let me copy this particular configuration file and I want to specify. Now you can see, because previous example we worked with the file system resource, now we are trying to work with the class path resource here. So after completion of this particular building workspace here, we'll try to run the same example here. Let me run Java application here. Now you can see name of this particular company and so the particular employer information we are getting here. So even though if you change to the particular resource here, so now what you understand here, whenever we are trying to work with the file system here, what we need to do, we need to specify the fully path of this particular file here. Getting the point. So where this particular file is resides here, we need to specify this with a qualified path here. Getting the point. So then only the file system resource is going to load here. And the class path resource, just simply I'm trying to specify the name of the configuration file. So whenever we are trying to specify the name of the configuration file, what it will do? So this particular class path resource, which is going to load, which is going to search this particular configuration file into this particular source directory. So this is the difference between the file system resource and the class path resource. So along with this, we are having another implementation here. Getting the point. Along with this, we are having another implementation classes here. So what are the another implementation classes we are having? So byte array resources. So whenever we are trying to work with a byte array, getting the point. So we can work with this particular byte array resource here. So byte array resource also one of the implementation of the particular resource interface here. So we'll observe what it contains here. Now you can see, so the package also important here. The package, so what is Spring Framework? Core.io. The resource also available into the same package, and same way the implementation class also available into this particular same package here. Now you can see, so again this class also which is extending from the abstract resource here. So we are having one abstract class here. From the abstract class, we are trying to check with the one concrete class that is called byte array resource here. Now you can see, basically the purpose of this particular byte array resource is, so whenever we are trying to give the byte array related information, we can go for this particular class here. Right. Now you can see which is expecting here byte array type here. The constructor which is expecting here byte array. But basically the previous resource classes, those are expecting as a string path here. But now you can see which is expecting as a byte array. So this is the difference between the previous class and the current classes here. Now we can see the constructors. The constructors are going to give more information. So how exactly this particular class is going to work here. Right. Now to get the particular byte array, what we are going to do, we'll try to call the get byte array method, which is trying to return the byte array concept here. So these are the remaining method we are having here. Hash code equals description and input string here. Right. So we'll try to check with another implementation, because so this is not suitable to discuss more information, because we are not going to work with the byte array. So we are going to work with the string configuration file here. So because of this, we don't have a time to discuss on this particular byte array resource. And just I want to provide the information. So what are the implementation classes? So this is provided by the Spring on the particular interface called resource here. Right. And another one here, input resource. Input stream resource. So again you can see input stream resource also having the same package here. Now if I'm going to open this particular input stream, what is doing here? So it's going to define the resource. So basically that is going to use retrieve from the input stream object here. Now you can observe the main class we are having input stream here. So this particular class is expecting the parameter as this particular constructor as an input stream here. So we need to specify the input stream object here to work with the particular Spring configuration here. Getting the point. So if we want to work with the input stream object related information, we can go for this particular class here. So we'll have one day on the all the resource class examples here. Okay, so as of now, what we discussed, those are the two classes are enough. But later we'll check with one more example here, byte array and this particular input stream. And later we are going to work with the URL resource here. So these are the different resources we are having here. So we'll have more information on the remaining resource classes here. Remaining resource classes here. Okay, back to here, we identified here this particular configuration, this particular resource classes we are having more than one. We identified each and every implementation class here. So later, what we need to do, so what, like Bean Factory, how many implementation classes it contains here? Bean Factory, which is contains only one, so that is called XML Bean Factory here. So XML Bean Factory is the implementation of this particular Bean Factory interface here. Right, we understand the Bean, whenever we are trying to work with the Bean Factory, the container will available based on this particular resource class. Right, so whenever we are trying to work with this particular XML Bean Factory, so we are trying to create with the Spring container object here, and later what we are doing is, so while specifying this particular resource object here, we are trying to load the configuration file where it is resides here. Okay, now, so as we discussed in the previous classes here, what we are understanding here, so the objects are going to created by the container, which is going to managed by the container also. But how exactly these objects are going to creating, and how these particular objects are going to manage here. Getting the point. So this section is very important here. Getting the point. Basically, from the new to finalize here, if the object is not used here, so the particular object we need to collect it by the garbage collector here. Getting the point. So the particular object, it needs to be collected by the garbage collector here. How exactly, which is going to collecting, and everything we are going to discuss away in the Bean life cycle here. So the Bean life cycle, which is going to provide the more information on the how this particular Bean is going to creating, and how exactly the particular Bean is trying to define an object after we perform any operations here. Right. So before going to check with the Bean life cycle here, so I need to check with another Bean container here, because so as I explained here, the container is coming with multiple classes here. Right. The first one we identified here, Bean Factory. First one we identified is a Bean Factory. The second one we need to check with another interface called ApplicationContext here. Another interface called ApplicationContext here. So if you understand here, ApplicationContext is also one interface here. ApplicationContext is also one interface. So now you can see the package is different here. org Spring Framework.context here. Okay. So we'll observe what about this particular Bean Factory. Now you can see this particular Bean Factory package is different here. So which is defined inside the Bean.factory, but ApplicationContext is defined another package here. So we need to understand here the ApplicationContext is defined in the another package called org Spring Framework.context here. Okay, now we identify the like where exactly this particular interfaces are available here. Now this is also one more interface here. So this is also one more interface here. So if it is an interface, we need to understand the implementation classes here. We need to understand the implementation classes here. We are having 3 implementation classes here. So we are having 3 implementation classes here. So now you can understand here. So basically, we want to check with so this section will reset the Bean Factory. and this section will reside the application context here, because application context will have more information here. So now bean factory, so the package first, the name of the package which is available differently. So the package we need to understand here something called, so this is a package here, right? org spring framework bean dot factory, and the name of the interface here we are having bean factory interface. So what is the implementation class we are having? The implementation class we are having something called XML bean factory. So XML bean factory is a implementation class. So this particular XML bean factory, which is expecting resource objective. So which is expecting resource objective. Right. Now you can see, so one interface having only one implementation class, but this particular resource we are having different here. So the particular resource we are having different here. What are the resource classes we are having? The first one we identified file system resource. And the second one, just now we had a simple example on this particular class path resource. So these are the resource classes here. And back to here, this particular application context here, getting the point. Application context. Application context is a one more interface here. Getting the point. Application context is a one more interface. So which is resides in the different package here. Which is resides in the different package, something called org Spring Framework dot context here. So this is a different package. Now you can see, so this particular class bean factory interface available in the beans dot factory, and this particular application context will resides in the org Spring Framework dot context here. Right. Now we understand here. So we need to check with the implementation classes here. So what are the implementation classes we are having? The first one here, class path XML, class path XML application context. So this is a one implementation class, and another one file system XML application context. So another one XML web application. So these are the three. So these are the three implementation classes we are having here. So carefully observe here. Now you can see the bean factory having less implementation classes, but the application context interface having more implementation classes here, and we are having three implementation classes here. We are having three implementation classes. So we'll try to check with the three implementation classes here. The first one, by seeing the name of this particular implementation class, we are trying to understand here how exactly the classes are going to work here. Right. So what you are understanding is the file, the class path XML application context here. If you understand here, so whenever we are having the configuration file at the class path location, we can use this particular class path XML application context here. And same way, the file system XML application context here. But if we are trying to provide the qualified path of the configuration file here, what we can do? We can go for this particular file system XML application context here. And the third one, XML web application context here. So what we are going to do? So at this time, we don't have a scope to discuss this, because whenever we are trying to check with MVC related applications here, getting the point. So MVC related applications, we are going to have the more time here. to discuss on this particular XML web application context here. Right. Now, understand here what exactly this particular class path XML application context will contain here. And so, one more important I want to explain here. Let me open class path XML application context here. So class path XML application context here. So this is the implementation class. Now, if I'm going to open here, so one abstract, we are having the abstract class here. So now you can see, so they are having different abstract classes here. Let me check with the abstract application context here. So finally, configurable application context here. So what happened? So you can say abstract context here, application context here. So getting the point. Now you can understand here. So this particular application context, so which is extended by the configurable application context here. Right. Now if I'm going back to this particular configurable application context here, now you can see abstract application context we are having one class here. Abstract application context is one class we are having here, and again this is one abstract class here. Now you can see where this particular abstract application context is used here. That is used here inside this particular abstract refreshable application context here. So back to here, and this class is again used by the one more class here. Now if I'm going to back to the abstract XML application context here. Again if I'm going back to the, now you can see class path XML application context here. So up to this abstract XML application context, up to this, these are the abstract classes here. So directly we are not going to create an object of this particular abstract classes, because we already discussed in the core Java concepts here. Right. So this is the base class here, because as of now we are identified all the classes are having abstract here. Now you can see whatever the class we have seen as of now, all the classes having abstract here. All the classes are having abstract. But now what you need to understand here, so this is a base class here. Right. So whenever we are trying to create an object of this particular class here, all the methods we can access here. All the methods we can access here. Getting the point. So this is very important here. Now, what is the purpose of this particular class here? So whenever we are trying to work with this particular class here, what it will do, so which is going to load the configuration file on, so the configuration file, if it is resides in the source directory, or we can call it as a class path directory. Right. The class path directory is nothing but our this particular source directory. This particular source directory we are going to call as a class path directory here. Right. Now we understand this particular class path here. So internally we are having the default constructor, and again which is expecting the application context. So application context is a interface. So again we can specify the implementation classes. So whenever we are trying to specify which is expecting as a parent here. Getting the point. So these are the application XML class path XML application context class is available here. Same way we can have the one more class here. What is the another class we are having? Something called file system XML application context here. So I'm going to open this particular class here. Now you can see abstract XML application context here. So now you can see this particular class also extending from the same here. Abstract XML application context here. So now you can see the file system also, which is extending from the abstract XML application context here. So if you know the basic inheritance concept in Java, so you can easily understand this particular the file system XML application context and class path XML application context, because both the classes are extending same classes here. So both the classes are extending the same abstract classes here, but only internal, like the implementation class will have some specific implementation here. The internal implementation class will have specific implementation here. So those we are going to discuss here whenever we are trying to work with this particular file system here, what we need to do, we need to specify the where exactly the file is resides here. So this is only the difference between the file system resource and class path resources. But one more thing I want to explain here, this particular application context here. Getting the point. So if I'm going to open the application context here, if I'm going to open application context here, so which is going to extend from the bean factory. So I want to provide hierarchical bean factory. Maybe I think this. So now you can see, so hierarchical bean factory is one more interface we are having. So this particular hierarchical bean factory, which is extending from the bean factory. Now, so what you are understanding is, by default, this particular application context, which is extending from the bean factory interface here. So which is extending from the bean factory interface. Whenever it is which is extending here, what we can do, we can access the particular method called getBean. We can access the particular method called getBean here. So the simple example we identified here using this particular by calling the method called getBean here. And here what we are doing is we are trying to pass the bean ID here. So we are trying to pass the bean ID. So as of now, what are the information we are trying to discuss here? The first one, so we are having multiple containers here. So the first container we identified, so bean factory is a one container and bean factory is a one interface here. So we need to check with the implementation class. So that is the identified XML bean factory is a implementation class. And same way, we are having one more container, so that is called application context here. The application context will have more than one implementation class here. So the particular application context here will having the different implementation classes. So we identify all the implementation classes purpose here. Now, to back to here, this particular section, what you are understanding is, so which is going to have a relation here. So here, what is the relation we are making here? Something called extents here. We are having extents here. So if you know the basic inheriting concept here, we can easily understand here what exactly this particular extent is going to work here, right? So whatever the features we are having into this particular bean factory, so we are going to access into this particular application context here, right? Now we understand the differences. But here, so even though if we are having this particular bean factory here, so why this particular application context is introduced here? So why this particular application context is introduced here? So we need to understand here. So what exactly we are going to get when we are trying to work with this particular application context here? Getting the point. So what are the advantages we are going to get when we are trying to work with the application context here? So basically, the first advantage we are going to get here. So internalization concept here. So if you want to convert some message into the specific language here, getting the point. So if you want to convert the specific message into the another language here, we can work with the application context here. So the concept we are going to call as a I-18N. The concept we are going to call as a I-18N. So this concept we are going to work here. So we'll see how exactly this particular example, like internalization concept is going to work here. Getting the point. So whatever the message we want to convert, so those methods are going to convert it into the specific language here. So to convert here, so what are the steps we need to follow? We'll have a simple example here. Okay, and with this is one advantage we are going to get. And after this, so we are going to have a generic way to load the resource files here. So generic way to load the resource files here. So now you can understand here. So now you can understand here, this particular XML bean factory, we are having resource. So whenever we are trying to work with this particular XML bean factory, what we are doing internally, again we are trying to create one resource object here. So whenever we are trying to specify the resource object here, based on the resource object, we're trying to load here. But inside this particular application context here, we don't have any resource information here. So that's the reason we are having the generic way to load the particular resource files here. So now, along with this particular configuration file, we can also load the images also. So whenever the images we are trying to specify into the class path or some path location, we can easily load the particular images sections also. So these are the advantage we are going to get here. And so we'll have the simple example on this particular application context here. Because so what we are going to work with the application context here, we are not going to work with the Bean Factory here. Because we identified here the simple example on the Bean Factory. But today onwards, we are going to check with the application context related examples only. So let me check with the application context here, how exactly we can work here. Let me check some of the messages I'm getting here. Class path XML application and XML Bean Factory using the source file path. So basically, XML Bean Factory is the implementation of Bean Factory interface here, right? And here, Bean Factory, so the objects are going to load lazily, and application contexts are going to load eagerly whenever the beans are having the scope called singleton scope. So this is the difference is very important here. Basically, by default, the Bean Factory interface, all the beans are going to load it lazily. Lazily is nothing but whenever we are trying to call this particular get bean method, so then only based on this particular bean ID, the object is going to create it and which is going to return the whatever the object is created here. But whatever this particular class path XML application context is, the class path XML application context is a implementation class of application context here. Cutting the point. By default, the application contexts are going to load the bean here eagerly, like without calling this particular bean. Whenever we are trying to load this particular configuration file, at this particular loading the time only, all the beans are going to load it here. But only the difference is, whenever those beans are having the scope called singleton here. So by default, the scope we are going to get as a singleton. Cutting the point. So we'll have a scope related example in our upcoming classes here. But make sure here, so based on this particular scope, the application context, the objects are going to create it here. But Bean Factory, which is going to work with the lazy concept here, whenever we are trying to call get bean method, so then only the particular object is going to create it, and whatever the object is created, those objects are going to return. Those objects are going to return by this particular method called get bean here. So this is the difference here. And one more here is it Unicode. So what you are trying to ask regarding this particular, is it Unicode? Okay, I got it. So maybe, yeah. Basically, so exactly, whenever we are trying to work with the particular message format here internally, which is going to check with the Unicode format only, because we are going to provide the string related information. The message, if you want to convert it into the international language here, not only the English. So if you want to convert into the other than this particular English here, so we are going to work with this particular I18N. So we'll have a simple example on this particular I18N example here. Okay, back to here, the simple example we need to check with the application context here. So to work with application context here, what are the steps we need to follow here? Now we can understand here. First we need to check with the application context here. So something called, again I'm trying to work with the container. New, first we'll go for the class path. So class path XML application context here, we need to specify the config location. So this particular config location, I want to work as a I have a small doubt. When we deploy the application and move to the production server, build the XML config file. So now I did not understand here. So what you are trying to ask here? So can you please elaborate more, like what exactly you are querying? See, whenever you are trying to change the XML file, basically production servers are how it's going to work here. The where or jar we are going to deploy, right? After you change, again we need a build here. So after build only, the changes are going to affected into the production server. But so if you're not making any build here, then so what the changes will available into the local only. But we can change here. But here, so if we want to change, so the changes we want to like reflected into the production environment. So we need a build definitely. Okay, so back to here. Now, what I am doing here, now you can observe here, I am trying to work with the class path XML application context here, right? And this is the interface we identified. This is the one implementation of the application context here. And just simply, I am specifying the Spring configuration file here. Let me run the same example here. Now you can understand more here. So without specifying any resource file here, we are trying to load the information here. We are trying to load the information here. But what are the advantages we are going to get whenever we are trying to work with the application context here? So this section is important here. Okay. Now back to here, we'll try to check with using this particular file system XML application context here. Here I don't want to use class path here. So file system XML application context here, and I need to specify this particular file where exactly which is resides here. Okay. Now I'm trying to work with the file system XML application context. So using this particular file system also, we are able to get the information here. Now we identify the difference between all the sections here. Okay. So these are about the bean is nothing but the container related information here, how we are trying to create a container object here, and what are the ways to create a container, and how exactly the container will have the advantages when we are going to work with the application context here, and same way what are the advantages we are going to have whenever we are trying to work with the bean factory. Okay, so the section we identified here, but now so this section up to what we are discussing here, like creating an object. But after creating an object here, how exactly the object is going to destroy here? Because we are not destroying any object here. So who is going to take care of here? So the container is going to take care of the creating and destroying the object information here. Getting the point? And now we need to understand here how exactly the destroying section is going to work here. So to understand here what we need to do, first we need to work with how exactly the beans are going to instantiate internally. Getting the point? So first we need to understand here the bean life cycle example here. Getting the point? The bean life cycle we need to understand here. So So to understand this particular bean life cycle here, first what we need to do. So this is the first phase here. So this is the first phase here. So something we are going to call as a what exactly it is doing internally. So instantiating the particular beans object here. Let me write this particular. Let me make it a little bit capture so that we are going to have understanding here. No. So this section, this is the first life cycle here, something called so instantiate. So how exactly we are trying to instantiate here, and later what it's doing internally. So basically after this, it's going to populate properties. So which is going to populate the properties here, and after populating the properties here, so what is doing internally? It's going to check with the set bean name. So whatever the bean name we are trying to provide here, the bean name is going to set here. So we'll observe how we are trying to set with the bean name here, right? And later what we are doing is, whenever we are having any bean factory related information, so we are going to set those bean factory information here. So we are going to set this particular bean factory information here. Simply, so to understand the bean name and bean factory, so we are going to check with some of the other interfaces here. So this particular life cycle is very important to get. So based on this life cycle only, the objects are going to create it, and the objects are going to destroyed here. And what we are doing here, so if we want to provide any initialization before this particular object creation, right, we are having so pre-initialization we are going to call. So how exactly this particular pre-initialization will work here? How exactly this particular pre-initialization is going to work here? To understand more here, what we are going to do, so this section we are going to call as a pre-initialization, and after calling this particular pre-initialization here, so we are going to call the, so here I am trying to write here. Now you can understand here, after calling this particular pre-initialization here, so what we are going to do, we are going to call the initializing the bean. So after we are going to, like how we are going to initializing the bean, the section we are going to identify here, something called initializing the bean. So initializing bean is nothing but, so in this case, the objects are going to created here. After creating this particular beans here, what we are doing here, so we are going to call any, custom methods here. Getting the point. So here we are going to call any custom method to make little bit more here. And after this, so this particular section, the beans are ready to use. The beans are ready to use. So these are the sections we need to understand here. How this particular hierarchy is going to work here. So this is the hierarchy. Getting the point. So this section is very important here. So what exactly we are doing internally? How exactly? So this section, we are not going to work with anything here. So all which is going to taken care by the container here. Right. So basically now, so how exactly this particular section is going to work here? So instantiate here. So how exactly we are trying to instantiate here? So to understand here this particular instantiate here, what we need to do here, whenever we are trying to call this particular bean, so first what exactly it's going to do, which is going to check with so what are the classes we are having and what is the idea of this particular bean. So based on that, it will try to create an object of this particular bean here. So whatever the beans we are going to specify in a particular XML type. Here, what we're doing here, basically we already identified here this section we are going to specify in a particular configuration file. So who is going to load this particular configuration file? The container is going to load the configuration file. So first what exactly it is checking here?